Welcome to the Unmuted podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'm the host for the podcast. And yes, I'm laughing at myself. It's Monday morning. I'm freezing my butt off. My guest is also freezing her butt off too. But you know what? It's all good because we have a lot to talk about. So hopefully we'll warm up. So this episode here is called "From Resistance to Readiness: Building Digital Confidence in HR Teams." So that's a loaded term, but I think most of my viewers know that it's all about probably going to be a little bit about AI, HR tech, and this and that. But it's really really hot topic right now. And so this is the Unmuted podcast. All of our episodes live on our website, ScaleHR.com, and on YouTube as well. And so next year we will be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and this podcast platform and that podcast platform and all the millions of podcast platforms out there. So we will be on there soon. But this podcast is all about HR, talent, HR tech, world of work, leadership, and so forth. And so to kick off this topic, I just want to make two key points. And so the first one is about the reality check. And so let's face it, HR teams being flooded right now with digital tools, HR tech tools, data dashboards, AI, on and on. I mean, I've been saying this for years that we keep getting slammed by new tools, but I think in the last couple of years with AI arriving on our shores, it's gone even faster. The other thing, I want to mention too is adoption, which is the critical part of this, right? It's not keeping pace. It's not keeping up, right? So, I think the feeling, generally speaking, is the HR practitioners and leaders are really unsure where to start. And this isn't new. This is not new. Well, how to keep up, or even how to make sense of all of this change that's being pushed their way. I think the second point, just to set the stage here, is the real barrier, though, is not technology. Technology, can be learned. I think the real challenge is the human side of a transformation. So you're talking about things like resistance, right, which comes out of fear, doubt, feeling left behind. And so today we're going to unpack the emotional blockers behind the actual resistance and talk about how HR can move from hesitation to confidence and lead digital change, not chase it. Okay. So we have a lot to unpack here, but this isn't about me. This is about our guest. And so I'm really, really thrilled and honored to have Mindy Honcoop on the Unmuted podcast. So Mindy, welcome. It's good to talk to you again.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And so, as I mentioned earlier, you're based in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
And you're freezing your butt off, which shocks me. What's going on down there?
It's a high today of 43. So I think everywhere is a little bit colder than usual right now. It seems a lot of people I know, a lot of my friends got a little white dusting. We did not get snow here for the Thanksgiving weekend, but I do know in the U.S. Several other of my friends that live elsewhere did. I think it's just it was a cold weekend overall.
So, for those of my guests who are situated in the great white north of Canada, 43 is 43 Fahrenheit, which is about 6 degrees Celsius. As we all know, the United States decided not to adopt the global metric system, so they stayed on their own system, which causes havoc and chaos. You're welcome. There you go. All right. So maybe tell our viewers a bit about what you do.
Yeah. I have the joy of being able, after 20 plus years as an HR professional and leader in-house, to have started Agile in HR. And Agile in HR started out as your typical kind of fractional HR executive for small, medium businesses, but really kind of over the past year turned into a kind of coming alongside the HR leader that was often left behind in these small, medium businesses to really kind of coach, mentor, and advise and guide and really come alongside of them in this time of great uncertainty, in this time often where things are shifting, often feeling like the world of work is falling apart and they feel like they're going crazy alone and isolated in their mind, and individuals reaching out to me seeking to have another brain to really think through some really tough things that they were seeing and observing and wanting to show up differently, but didn't quite know how to do that on their own.
Yeah. No, it sounds great. And several people have taken that route in the last 4 or 5 years, especially with COVID coming on our shores and that playing a huge issue. And we're all, for HR. So, okay. Thank you for that. And of course, obviously you spoke at the recent Social HR Camp Austin. It's our second one in Austin. It was a small crowd, but it was great to see you in your element. And, obviously,
Oh, thanks,
you know,
Jeff.
you were fantastic. So thanks for doing that. And so, okay, so let's get into our first question here. So I have a
Hmm.
couple of questions here for you. And so when we talk about change resistance in HR,
Hmm.
what are we really seeing? So what's
Hmm.
happening emotionally, behaviorally that leaders often overlook?
Well, I love, first of all, 'cause sometimes I think we see resistance, but don't take the time to like understand what's underneath that, like the
Yeah,
emotions underneath that. So I think often resistance, first of all, is quickly labeled as bad. And how do we now manage through this resistance that we're labeling as bad? And often we are going through then the process, or we've jumped to um, behavior issues that we need to mitigate and manage. And then often, unfortunately, it's managing out. And so often I first come through with the curiosity to seek to understand when I see signs of resistance, or as people are talking about resistance, kind of taking a step back and saying, well, tell me, say more about that. Say more about, how are you perceiving this behavior as resistant? How is that showing up? Have we taken the time to dig in a little bit deeper and understand what is behind the resistance? What's going on behind someone choosing to put on a behavior that's being perceived in the organization as resistance? What emotions might be, or a combination of emotions, be showing up for someone? And often when I start to enter into that conversation, it's a pause of, well, actually, there's some questions here that we need to go and learn more, and create an open dialogue with employees to explore that more.
that's a good point. And I think it's just segueing into my next question, which really around technology and obviously AI. So what do you think the biggest disconnect lies, between HR and IT when it comes to adopting tools and AI?
Oh, Jeff, that's a
How
loaded
much time do you
question.
have? You got 22 seconds. Go. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I think it's sad that we've actually often, sometimes these decisions are being made without us even being aware. I think often, in the situations I've experienced, HR wasn't even aware of these decisions. And now they're being asked to help post decision aid in what's truly a change management complexity that has broken down because they hadn't thought through truly the elements of what was the current state. Why was this, there obviously something has been happening in the organization to make this change of technology often. And it's unfortunately often of one person that's making this decision, or a group of leaders in isolation, that the individuals that this decision is impacting on the day to day didn't even get a chance to speak into their pain points, the blockers, the barriers, or understand or test out, is this new technology going to really move the needle from where we're at today to that future desired state? And was the future desired state even articulated clearly to really help with the why of why are we moving in this direction? Why are we being asked now to stop doing this and start doing this in this tool? Then often HR is like, hey, help us with this group of employees who need to start adopting and using these technologies, and help us like think through how to communicate this in a very reactive way versus being a part of the decision making process up front. And if we're talking even about like HR budget and tools that are maybe specific just to the HR tech stack, I often find that decision is also being, I don't know if the word is correctly to say taken away, because it may not have been there to begin with, but it often is where the individuals I'm working with are like, yeah, I don't have that in my budget anymore. It's all being rolled up under IT, or, someone in product. And I don't get to have a say anymore in that. And then it's an interesting conversation of, well, how do what might that look like for you to have a voice in that? How might you start knocking on some doors to ask questions that creates a dialogue in which you get to start to or maintain that voice?
This is the question that always gets me because my background is quite similar to yours,
Mhm.
actually. I've been an HR leader for many years. And I think the first thing is HR as a community. We're much more tech savvy today than, say,
No.
20 years ago, right? And so we have that ability now to figure out the actual business strategy, the HR strategy, and then come up with our own list of must-have for all of our tech tools. And we can translate that back into outcomes. So 25 years ago was
Mhm.
really hard, for us to do that, which is why the IT probably did everything. Now, so what I found is that because of our digital capability, IT's falling behind when it comes to the HR side of things. They don't really understand anymore. And so there's a huge disconnect. And so I always find that I
Mhm.
have to sit with them and take them through the entire process so that they fully understand it, right? I think the other thing too that gets missed is change management.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, I've heard story after story after story just in the last year
Mhm.
from organizations saying, yeah, so so we have new tools, new AI tools, and they just said go use them, and it's like, so how is that going for you? Well, it's not, right? Because you can't do that. So I'm just kind of curious just to hear your thoughts about that.
Uh, yeah, I would echo and yes, and really and uplift what you just said. And I think that and it's also coming back to from a change management perspective, it's not just project management. It is like
Right.
change management. It
Yeah.
is like the human element of change that is often missing. And if you go back into like what happened here and you start asking those questions when we're talking about even the resistance that's being seen as a result of lack of change management and understanding the emotions and they were missed. We didn't understand where the emotions were for the humans in the workplace that we're about to make an impact with, and how is like doubt and overwhelm and isolation and fear, often those are kind of their four pillar emotions, really filtering or we woven into the tapestry of the low number of adoption and usage that we're seeing. There's so many projects that you see like the time and the expense of launching something is immense, and then you're seeing like
Mhm.
over and over again because we didn't do the due diligence up front of opening a dialogue with the people in our organization, with those that are being impacted, and thinking through who are like the key stakeholders and like where are they at today, what are they feeling, and how might they, in opening up this dialogue, be able to speak into what's about to happen and to be heard, to understand the why, to align. We miss then when we do launch something, we then are like feeding into the very emotions that we don't understand, because we've now created um lack of clarity, doubt. We've
Yeah.
created a lack of focus. We're not aligned, overwhelmed. We now have broken trust with our employees yet again because they weren't a part of the process. Fear. And we've also disconnected, right? We've now created
Yeah.
a gap, thus isolation, us versus them. We've just fed into it again. So these
Yeah.
emotions, and when you start to get clear on it, you start to really be able to understand the blockers. Now you can start to see how is this coming up to then inform plans of readiness, thus change management.
Uh, And the one thing that we talked about earlier was the idea that people are feeling, uh, overwhelmed, also unsure. They just
Yeah.
lack confidence, obviously, with all of this stuff. And so what are some practical steps that HR leaders can take to start to improve digital uh,
Mm.
literacy, IQ, and confidence on their team, especially for those people who are feeling really overwhelmed?
Yeah. And and if we don't have thoughtful change management, then the overwhelm gets worse. Because just think about how many times are we
Sure.
even asking employees to change, and do we have a
Yeah.
calendar of change? Because I feel like a lot of times we're just like we're we are driving change in our organization without the thought of how much change are we asking someone to digest, within a period of time. If we were even just to take a step back and as a leadership, think it through and even think through from once again, I know it's not a sexy word, but change management and project management of how many things are, and even down to communication. How much are we communicating? In what way are we communicating? What is the impact? What's the time frame that we're giving someone to change? Are we giving them time to change before we then drop yet another thing? And even just being thoughtful around, how and who and when and how is success going to be measured, we can start to really think through and be more thoughtful around, first of all, prioritizing, keeping people aligned, creating more of a sequence of change to help manage that overwhelm, to help prepare people for what's about to happen before it happens, before it drops, so that they can even take time. Like, do we know these cycles where we're going to have people like ramping up, ramping down, providing them time to get skilled if it's going to require a skill change? Do we know the skill gaps so that when it drops, it's not like, okay, now learn it. Often we know about the change before it happens.
That's true.
And so how are we even thinking through then giving them time to, first of all, realize this is happening so they can go through the emotional processing? We're going to be letting things go and sometimes often grieving the comfort of, I knew how to do this job. I've done that for 5 years. And now I'm going to have to like stop that. I'm going to grieve the comfort that I had in that. And now you're asking me to like try something out. Okay, awesome. But are you even letting me process this grief and this feeling that I'm having right now? And in order to get into a clear mindset that I can remain in possibility and have, and then understand the why so that I can get the buy-in and then have the space to experiment, because this is new. I'm going to fail. I'm not going to get it right the first time. And do I have the time to do that? Do I have the ability to feel safe in doing that? And I think that all feeds in that overwhelm, right? Because if we're like, hey, tomorrow or, today we launched this new thing. Today you're going to start doing this. In 24 hours, we expect you to be doing this really well, Jeff. And by the way, if you don't, all right, your next review cycle is in just a short amount of time, and like, you're going to feed your family, and we expected to be doing this you can get a sense. And if you're asking people to do this for more than one thing within a quarter, wow.
Well, a nice thing about like AI, for example, is that you can run things along, or there's testing grounds alongside your real job, and and it can be in the background, and you're playing with it, and you're trialing it, and you're testing it, and you're having conversation with people, because both of us know that people change at different speeds. So it's not like we're all
exactly
from the same piece of cloth, right?
Right. But you have to know your employee population for that,
Well,
and
that's true.
the demographics of your employees, and how do they learn? How do they best learn? And I think one of the things with the overwhelm, Jeff, that I see is having a really good communication plan, often is missed. So how are we even letting the managers of these employees know in advance that these things are happening? How are we even setting them up to be successful, to answer questions? So often we're not. And then when the employees go to their manager, which they do, the manager, unfortunately, still themselves are wrapping their brain around the change, trying to understand it. Now you have people coming to them and asking them. And then often it's like, this is happening to me, it's them, right? Versus, and then they're like, manager, why did you say that? Why didn't you own this as a part of the change? Well, I don't still have the answer. And so that's often when and I really think through with, even when I was in-house, and really thinking through, okay, who are the managers of the impact? Can we bring them in early to understand the change? And often it's so interesting. It'd be the lack of trust in the organization of why they didn't want to bring the managers in earlier. Well, that's a different problem to solve. How do we solve for that trust then in the organization so that our managers are capable to professionally receive these messages early, wrap their brains around it, get them a chance to kind of even, test the FAQs, which I always find is the best, man. When we let managers in and they really test the FAQs, we have better and stronger FAQs. Now we have them feeling strength to be able to help support then the individuals that are often more impacted with the day-to-day changes.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the answer to that question is a whole nother session. When we're thinking about overwhelm, if we were doing all these things better, and this is not like doing more, Jeff. I think the other thing too is often people are like, okay, well, we don't have the money, we don't have the time. I'm like, this doesn't have to be more money or more time. This is about thinking, what are you doing today? And how do we get better at just the things that we're doing? The better
100%.
meetings, one-on-ones, manager communication, manager resources, and thinking through that. Yes, we have AI. Well, how have we created clarity of space? Like, that's what I loved about you bringing us together at the Social HR Camp, because so many of the individuals there even said, yeah, it's not clear, how do we use AI in our organizations? Do we have good governance? Have we created a safe playground? And how transparent is that, so that they can, use these tools and resources in a way to help and augment their work, to be able to then, asynchronously then use it to help support them to then adapt to the change that we're giving to them.
Yeah, I did a workshop. I co-presented on this workshop to 400 HR practitioners here in Toronto, and it was really sort of interesting because we were trying to come up with a framework, almost like an adoption framework, and so we
Yeah.
presented something, and it was really interesting because a lot of people were just overwhelmed, didn't know where to start, didn't
Yeah.
have the empowerment from their teams or what have you to even go
Mhm.
in any direction. Didn't understand the connection between the business and then actually AI. Didn't
Yeah.
even understand what AI could do. So,
Yeah.
obviously both of us know it's such a huge thing, but there's so many different use cases and how you use it and which platform to use. Um,
Yeah.
and so it was a lot of fear. And so I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, how do you turn fear into fuel? And so my question to
Mhm.
you is, how can leaders reframe fear
Mhm.
or resistance into readiness and momentum?
Yeah, yeah. It's a really around to, and I don't think this is new either, right? Because we've seen organizations that were agile, and they thought about
Yeah.
experimentation and trust, and like, how do we create these continuous learning environments, right? And so it's like, how do we hone those concepts into and fuel it into these conversations about how are we rewarding learning around AI? How are we normalizing the experimentation of AI to alleviate that fear, and creating a groundwork of a commonality of language and expectations of success for our team? Because I think we're all in a different journey of that. And so how are we then creating, I know for one HR like organization, how they normalized the learning and experimentation is they started, first of all, what we talked about, right? Like, create, how do we first of all play with this in a safe way? What are the tools that are safe for our organization to use? And then about, thinking through on a reoccurring cadence, it was, let's set up a bi-weekly, they call it an AI, what did they call it? It was like an AI, oh my goodness, it was so clever how they called it. I'm not going to remember the name now. It was like an AI co-design lab or something like that. That was
Okay.
every other Friday. And they would get together, and they were really piloting, like, specific, they had identified some key barriers and blockers to how their team was working that they felt was repetitive and consistent, and that could really use some different AI solutions. And then they all kind of went away based on their functions to these identified, prioritized problems. And every other week, they were showcasing little mini pilots of how they had thought through using the approved AI technology, and then kind of showcasing that, almost like in a pitch fest type thing. And then they would kind of decide, should we go further with this out of what was presented, or, should we hold on that and dig into something else, or continue to experiment further? And so there was a sense of play that was really
Okay.
fun, but it wasn't just play for nothing. It was play for solving these identified, aligned business problems. So that, and then some of them continued to go well, and then they implemented those things and started to use and iterate on them.
Did you find that some of the people that were in the room were obviously got it, like they got it sort
Yeah,
of right
yeah,
away, and so some
yes,
obviously didn't. So I've always viewed everything as bell curve. So you always have to me, I think of life in a bell curve. You got your early adopters, most of your employees, and then you have your laggards. So did you find that kind of phenomenon also transpired here?
So yeah, I mean, yeah, there's some people I think that were like, at first they're like, I've been doing this already. They're like, oh my goodness, there we go. But they I think it was also though good because I think for some people they thought everyone was in the same place as them, but it wasn't. And so it was like a safe place to say, no matter where you're at in this journey, it's okay because now's a time where we're going to get to play. And if anyone has any questions, this is the safe place to ask about it. So, and then also
Right.
kind of identifying then, okay, who was further in that journey, who wasn't. Now we have great safety of being able to ask questions. Now I kind of know who's further along and others. But it was in a way of play where they also their natural like groupings or people would join and like cross-functional or functional problems to solve. And then they were able to kind of shadow and see other people in a safe way that may be further along. And it was a safe place for them to start to jump in if they hadn't yet. And so now we're starting to have a conversation, but bring people along that weren't there, but then other people also were having to that were further in the journey were like needing to continue their learning in order to continue to add and drive value. But eventually it normalizes, right, over time, where they start to become less, you have less of these laggards back behind, and you're starting to see more people come along and be at the same level of experience. Obviously, there's always outliers, but the greater part of that group became,
Right.
the average.
That's great. So my last question for you was, if our viewers can learn just one thing from anything that we've talked about today, what is that one thing?
The one thing is that resistance is just the tip of the iceberg. And take the time to seek to understand the emotions behind that. Don't label resistance as bad.
Yeah.
Actually reframe it as, oh, this is interesting. There's more I need to dig into here. Let's get curious about this.
So change resistance. It's just part of the process, right?
100%. It's not bad. It's just part of the process. Exactly. It's on the pathway to readiness, and we can't get to readiness without that curiosity.
Well, with that, Mindy, I just want to thank you very much for being here. And so for our viewers, this is the Unmuted Podcast. And my name is Jeff. Our episodes live on our website at ScaleHR.com, on YouTube as well. So please chime in, comment, share your thoughts. All of our episodes normally get dropped on Thursdays, so Thursday morning. So Mindy, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah.
And I hope you get warmer.